Welcome to HUD's Section 3 Final Rule Overview for Housing and Community Development Financial Assistance. This video will help grantees understand and implement the Section 3 Final Rule requirements outlined in 24 CFR Part 75. First, let's review what Section 3 is and the purpose behind Section 3. Section 3 is a requirement of the Housing and Urban Development Act of 1968. The purpose of Section 3 is to ensure that employment, training, and contracting opportunities that result from the spending of HUD funds are directed to low and very low income persons, especially recipients of government assistance for housing, like public housing residents or residents that receive Section 8 assisted housing. Each year, HUD invests billions of federal dollars into distressed communities across the country for projects that build and rehabilitate housing, improve infrastructure, and help families achieve self-sufficiency. Through Section 3, HUD recipients and their subrecipients, contractors and subcontractors, provide the opportunity for low and very low income families to achieve and maintain self-sufficiency. The previous Section 3 regulations were outdated and not as effective as HUD believed that they could be at creating sustained employment and career development opportunities. So HUD updated the rule and published the final rule requirements on September 29, 2020. The new rule became effective on November 30, 2020, and on July 1, 2021, compliance with the final rule began. The new rule published updates to HUD Section 3 requirements in 5 ways. 1. By focusing on labor hours, the new rule promotes sustained employment and career development for low and very low income workers. 2. Focuses reporting on outcome metrics. 3. Streamlines reporting requirements to align them with typical business practices. 4. Provides for program-specific oversight. And 5. Clarifies the obligations of entities that are covered by Section 3. Overall, with the update, HUD's goal is to 1. Increase the impact of Section 3 on low and very low income persons. 2. Increase compliance with Section 3 requirements. And 3. Reduce regulatory burden. Legacy projects are projects where contracts were executed or projects for which assistance or funds were committed prior to November 30, 2020. Legacy projects are required to adhere to the requirements of the old Part 135 rule. Commitment means when funds were received by the recipient from HUD. For legacy projects, recipients will still be expected to maintain records of compliance, but will no longer be required to report Section 3 compliance to HUD in SPEARS. Transition projects are projects where assistance or funds were committed between November 30, 2020 and July 1, 2021. These projects are subject to the new Section 3 regulations, and recipients will need to follow the final rule for new grants, commitments, and contracts that are executed during the transition period. For transition projects, recipients will be expected to maintain records of compliance with Section 3, but will not be required to report to HUD on the requirements found in 24 CFR Part 75 during the transition, unless it's an OBGA program and the activity is still open after July 1, 2021. In this section of the video, we will review the definitions for 1. Section 3 project. 2. Section 3 worker. 3. Targeted Section 3 worker. 4. Section 3 business concern. And 5. Labor hours. A Section 3 project is a site or sites combined with any building or buildings and improvements located on the site or sites that are under common ownership, management, and financing. A Section 3 worker is any worker who currently fits, or when hired within the past 5 years, fit at least one of the following categories as documented. 1. Is a low or very low income worker, which means that the worker's income is below the income limit established by HUD, which is 80% of the area median income. Or 2. Is employed by a Section 3 business concern. Or 3. Is a youth build participant. A few important things to note under the final rule is that 1. The income limits are established at 80% of the area median individual income. This means that a worker's individual income will be used to determine Section 3 eligibility, not the family or household income. Also, 2. The residential address of the worker is used to determine the Section 3 worker income limits. Therefore, the worker's income limits would be based upon the Metropolitan Statistical Area, or MSA, in which the worker resides. For Section 3 projects that include HCD assistance, a targeted Section 3 worker is any worker who is employed by a Section 3 business concern, or any worker who currently fits, or when hired, fit one of the following categories as documented within the past 5 years. 1. Is a worker living within the service area or the neighborhood of the project. Or 2. Is a youth build participant. Under the targeted Section 3 worker definition for HCD assistance, the service area, or the neighborhood of the project, is defined as an area within 1 mile of the Section 3 project, or if fewer than 5,000 people live within 1 mile of a Section 3 project, then the service area, or neighborhood of the project, is within a circle centered on the Section 3 project that includes a population of 5,000 people, based on the most recent U.S. Census data. A Section 3 business concern is a business that meets at least one of the following criteria that has been documented within the last 6-month period. 1. At least 51% owned and controlled by low or very low income persons. Or 2. At least 51% owned and controlled by current public housing residents, or residents who currently live in Section 8 assisted housing. Or 3. Over 75% of the labor hours performed for the business over the prior 3-month period are performed by Section 3 workers. The final rule tracks and reports labor hours. For HCD assistance, labor hours are hours worked by all workers employed on a Section 3 project. Many HUD-funded programs are covered by Section 3. Section 3 can apply to certain HUD programs funded by the Office of Public and Indian Housing, the Office of Community Planning and Development, the Office of Housing Rental Assistance Demonstration, the Office of Multifamily Housing, the Office of Lead Hazard Control and Healthy Homes, and mixed finance projects or development. For HCD assistance, Section 3 applies to housing rehab projects, housing construction projects, and other public construction projects where total amount of HCD assistance for the project exceeds $200,000 from one or more HUD programs. For HCD assistance, Section 3 applicability is determined at the project level. For HCD projects that include public housing assistance, any amount of HCD assistance triggers Section 3, as public housing assistance has no thresholds. Section 3 applies to lead projects if the amount of assistance from the Office of Lead Hazard Control and Healthy Homes program exceeds $100,000. Note that the amount of HCD assistance is not included in calculating whether the lead assistance exceeds the $100,000 threshold. The amount of lead assistance is not included in calculating whether the amount of other HCD assistance exceeds the $200,000 threshold. Section 3 does not apply to material supply contracts. Material supply contracts are contracts that do not require any labor. For example, a contract for office or janitorial supplies would not be covered by Section 3. However, a contract to replace windows that includes the removal of existing windows and the installation of new windows would be covered due to the involvement of labor. Section 3 also does not apply to contracts, subcontracts, grants, or subgrants subject to Indian and tribal preferences. Under the final rule, recipients will be considered to have complied with the Section 3 requirements and met the safe harbor if they certify that they 1. Have met or exceeded the applicable Section 3 benchmarks, and 2. Certify that they followed the required prioritization of effort requirements, absent evidence to the contrary. If recipients are unable to meet the requirements, then recipients must report on qualitative efforts made to meet the requirements. Next, let's review the Section 3 benchmarks. For HCD assistance, to meet the benchmarks for safe harbor: 1. 25% or more of all labor hours worked on a project must be worked by Section 3 workers, and 2. 5% or more of all labor hours worked on a project must be worked by targeted Section 3 workers. It is important to note that the 5% goal for targeted Section 3 workers is contained within the 25% goal. All targeted Section 3 workers are Section 3 workers, but not all Section 3 workers are targeted Section 3 workers. To calculate labor hours, the recipient will take the Section 3 labor hours worked on a project and divide that number by the total number of labor hours worked on a project. This amount must equal or exceed 25%. In addition to the Section 3 worker goal, the recipient must also meet the targeted Section 3 worker goal. The recipient will take the targeted Section 3 labor hours worked and divide that number by the total labor hours worked. This amount must equal or exceed 5%. If both goals are met, then the recipient met the Safe Harbor benchmarks. Recipients must meet both goals to meet Safe Harbor. If the goals are not met, then the recipient must report on qualitative efforts that were made to comply with the requirements. Examples of qualitative efforts may include outreach efforts, efforts to provide technical assistance, job or workforce readiness training, and coordination activities. There is a special category of labor hours known as professional services labor hours. Professional services or non-construction services that require an advanced degree or professional licensing are excluded from the Section 3 requirements. This means that you do not have to include professional services labor hours in your benchmark calculations. These non-construction services may include services such as contracts for legal services, financial consulting, accounting services, environmental assessment services, architectural services, and civil engineering services. Although professional services are excluded from the final rule, the rule does offer a bonus in the reporting for labor hours performed by Section 3 workers and targeted Section 3 workers working under the professional services category. To get the bonus, you would include those hours in the numerator of the calculation and exclude them from the denominator of the calculation. For HCD assistance, recipients should, to the greatest extent feasible, ensure that employment and training opportunities arising in connection with Section 3 projects are provided in the following order of priority. 1. To Section 3 workers residing within the service area or neighborhood of the project. And 2. To participants in youth build programs. Note that these efforts must be consistent with existing federal, state, and local laws and regulations. For contracting, HCD recipients should, to the greatest extent feasible, ensure that contracts for work awarded in connection with Section 3 projects are provided in the following order of priority. 1. To Section 3 business concerns that provide economic opportunities to Section 3 workers residing within the service area or the neighborhood of the project. And 2. To youth build programs. All efforts must be made consistent with existing federal, state, and local laws and regulations. There are certain types of certifications that recipients or their subrecipients, contractors and subcontractors, must maintain under the final rule to document eligibility. For Section 3 workers, one of the following certifications must be maintained to document eligibility. 1. Self-certification from the worker that they meet the income guidelines. Or 2. Self-certification that the worker participates in a means-tested program, such as public housing or Section 8 assisted housing. Or 3. Self-certification that the person is a youth build participant. Or 4. Certification from a PHA, property manager, owner, or administrator of project-based or tenant-based Section 8 assisted housing, certifying that the persons receive assisted housing. Or 5. Employer certifications that the worker meets the income guidelines or is employed by a Section 3 business concern. For projects funded with HCD assistance, one of the following types of certifications must be maintained to document targeted Section 3 worker eligibility. 1. An employer's confirmation that a worker's residence is within the service area or neighborhood of the project. 2. An employer's certification that the worker is employed by a Section 3 business concern. Or 3. A worker's self-certification that the worker is a Youth Build participant. For projects that involve multiple funding sources, recipients should ensure that the certifications that they are maintaining are aligned with the subpart that is being followed. Recipients may report on Section 3 workers and targeted Section 3 workers for up to 5 years from when their certification as a Section 3 worker or targeted Section 3 worker is established. This 5-year period runs as long as the worker is employed with the same employer. For Section 3 Business Concern Certification, businesses may self-certify to claim their status during the bidding or contracting process. The Section 3 status of that business should be verified before awarding any contracts or subcontracts. Once a business is certified as a Section 3 business concern, it will retain that status for as long as it continues to meet the definition outlined in the regulations. Ultimately, recipients are responsible for maintaining certifications to verify Section 3 business concern eligibility. Recipients of HCD assistance must include language applying Section 3 requirements in any subrecipient agreement or contract for a Section 3 project, and require subrecipients, contractors, and subcontractors to meet the prioritization requirements. HCD recipients' reporting timeline will be based upon their programmatic requirements and will report data as follows. For home, CDBG, and HTF, recipients are required to report an IDIS at project completion and in the Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report, or CAPER. For CDBG DRGR, CDBG MIT, and CDBG RHP, recipients are required to report in DRGR at project completion. Lead grantees will report in the Healthy Homes Grant Management System starting at 60 days after the end of their first fiscal year that begins after July 1st, 2021. The same data will be collected across all programs for consistency purposes. Recipients will report Section 3 labor hours, targeted Section 3 labor hours, total labor hours, and nature of recipients' efforts. The final rule requires that HUD have access to all recipient records, reports, and other documents that are maintained to demonstrate compliance with the Section 3 requirements. Recipients or their subrecipients, contractors and subcontractors, must maintain documentation to ensure that workers meet the Section 3 worker or targeted Section 3 worker definitions. This documentation must be maintained for the time period required for record retentions according to applicable program regulations or according to 2 CFR 200 if there are no applicable program regulations. Complaints alleging failure of compliance may be reported to the applicable HUD program office or to the local HUD field office. If the Office of Field Policy and Management receives complaints, they will be referred to the appropriate HUD program office. If the HUD program office finds that the complaint has merit, there will be a formal process. Lastly, to wrap things up, let's go over how to handle projects that include multiple sources of funding. For projects that include multiple sources of HCD assistance, recipients must follow Subpart C of the requirements. For reporting, recipients must report on a project as a whole, identify the multiple associated recipients, and must report to the applicable program office. For projects that include HCD funds and public housing funds, the HCD recipient has the option of following Subpart B or Subpart C of the requirements for the targeted Section 3 worker definition and the prioritization of effort requirements. For projects that include HCD assistance and public housing assistance, the HCD recipient and public housing recipient must report on the project as a whole and identify the multiple associated recipients. For more information about the Section 3 final rule and to find your regional Section 3 point of contact, you may visit the www.hud.gov/Section3 and www.hudexchange.info/programs/Section-3 websites.